Okay, so we're back. It's our third hour, first class of server-side scripting. Jacob had an interesting question. He's installed Visual Studio and it said it's asking me to register. What account do I use? Do I use my student account, my Hotmail account? The answer is it doesn't matter. Use any Microsoft account. That would your student email is a Microsoft account, so you can register with any email. It really doesn't make any difference. Okay, can use either one. So I'm going to fire up Visual Studio. So we're going to do a few things. The first thing I'm going to do is show you what Visual Studio gives us kind of right out of the box if you want to use it by way of an application kind of starter template. So you're free to use it. It's a huge time saver. I'm not going to use it beyond today. I'm just going to show it to you. We're going to kind of do stuff from scratch, but I want to show you that it's there. So I'll open up Visual Studio. So this is typically what you're going to get. I may have a few windows open, you don't, but I'll show you some of this stuff. So you get this splash screen, which you can disable. One of the nice things is Microsoft publishes news and updates every day, and they actually show up in Visual Studio. So if they have a new plugin or extension or an update, you disable this startup screen, which you can do if it annoys you. But you can actually see what's going on, and they've got links to tutorials and other things. It always shows up every time you open the software. Okay. Over here on the left, it will show you your most recent projects. So if you want to go back to working on a project, you can just grab it from here. And all kinds of different platforms. Okay. One of the other things that we're going to do, we talked briefly about hosting, that we said we needed a Windows server for hosting. Well, we all have access to Windows hosting, which is Azure, right? So those of you who took Tom's class, you probably have your Azure account set up already, which is great because we can host our ASP.NET applications. For those of you who don't have an Azure account, we'll walk through that, probably not today, but another day. Right? So Azure is Microsoft's cloud hosting platform. And again, it comes part of the DreamSpark program. So we get access to free cloud hosting for our ASP.NET applications as well. And we can either publish them directly through Visual Studio, we can use FTP as we've done in the past, or we can deploy them through GitHub, which is even easier. We can do all of that stuff right in through Visual Studio. So we won't use Azure today, but we'll do that later on. So here's what I want you to do, just to see what you get right out of the box. If you click on File and New, and notice also here it has, we can create new repositories right here, right in Visual Studio. If we click New Project, which is typically how we'll start with a new application, so we get a bunch of options here. The first one is asking what version of the framework do you want to target? So it goes all the way back to version 2.0 in 2005. So we'll keep it at the most current. Well, I think I've got it at 4.5.2 as the default. Doesn't really matter whether you choose 4.5 or 4.6, not critical. And then we have, here are the different languages. It says, okay, well, what kind of project do you want to build? We've got templates for C#, all these different options. Okay, there's even a game template, TypeScript, some other things. So I'm going to expand C#, and then even within C#, look at all the options we have about what we can do here. You want to build an iOS application with C#? No problem. Using the Xamarin engine that now comes with Visual Studio. What's Sharepoint? Anybody heard of Sharepoint at all? No one? What is Sharepoint?
It's kind of so to show, like, to share any files between users, usually companies.
Yeah, we use it here at Georgian. It's largely an online kind of document library. And it's a pre-existing Microsoft product, but you can customize it and build onto it as well. So you can build SharePoint applications.
And then also they have SharePoint design.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of CMS like WordPress.
Right, and we can build applications with that as well and customize it through here. So anyway, what we want with all these different C# applications, what we're going to pick for now, and most of the time we're going to pick, is an ASP.NET web application. Okay? I'm not really going to do anything in here. I'm just going to show you how it works. I'm not going to need to publish this code. There's the default location. So it will save your projects in My Documents, Visual Studio 2015 projects. And it'll create a new folder. Eventually, I'm going to create a COMP2084 folder and save my projects in there. But for now, I'll just leave this. I'll just call it Web Application 1. Notice we also have these options. We can either tell it to put it in a new folder. You can also say create a new Git repository while you create the solution. I'm not going to do that now, but later on I will enable that option. So I'll click OK. Whoops, did I just pick Visual Basic? Sorry, I think I have to do that again. Yes, I'm still in Visual Basic. Sorry, when I pick C# and web, this is all I get, ASP.NET Web Application. This is probably, is this the only option you have? That's fine, so that's what we're gonna do. I'll click OK. And now we've got different kinds, right? If we want, it's asking, it has a template for an API. So no user interface, only a service that exchanges data, JSON data. There's a template for that. There's a single page. Later we'll use MVC. Most of the time we're going to use empty. For this version, we're just going to pick web forms. And again, there's lots of options here. We can actually say we could have the security automatically implemented for us. I'll just leave this right now as a username and password, but we could integrate it with existing accounts or with Windows authentication, as someone mentioned earlier. If you want to access the application, you have to have a Windows network username and password. I'll just leave that as individual user accounts, and we can connect it to Azure right here, right now, if we wanted to. So you can see what I mean, how it automates a lot of stuff for us. A couple of clicks and we can be all set up with GitHub, with Azure, with security. We haven't written any code. I'll just click OK. So I'm just going to click Web Forms. I'll leave everything else out. We can even add unit testing. So this will take a minute because we can see down here what it's adding. It's adding jQuery, Bootstrap. It's automatically adding a whole bunch of libraries to our project. Right? This means the project's going to be big right out of the box, probably going to be, I don't know, 30, 40 megabytes. We haven't written any code yet. So let's see how big this actually is. So I'll go to Documents. Oh, here's my project. So that's 63 megabytes. Just built a 63 megabyte web application. We haven't done anything with it yet. So let's look at what's here. What did it give us? Well, it gave us several pages. So there's our home page, an about page. It gave us master pages. So masters are nice features. Anybody have an idea what a master page might be? Here's our code. I can make this bigger. What do you suppose the purpose of a master? So this is site.master. What do you think the purpose of this? It contains header and footer. It contains the login. Right, it's a template. So right out of the box, it gives us this template, and all the pages will use this template to get the site's theme and have header, footer, login, and those things are shared. We don't have to write our own include files like we did with PHP. And we can create different master pages. If we think on most websites, we usually have two parts to a website, right? We have the public website with one site design, and we might have a site control panel or dashboard that has a different layout. So in that case, we may have two master pages, maybe a public.master and an admin.master. Or if we have different layouts, we can create as many master pages as we want with different different layouts. We've got this, we'll use this file. Our web.config. So Visual Studio gives us a web.config. This is the configuration file for all of our ASP.NET applications. We'll always have this. So what's going on here? Let me just minimize that window for a minute. What's that? Yeah, that's where our database connection goes, right? Just like in our PHP applications, we created a db.php, so we only had to put our connection in one place. We do it the same. So any other configuration, what version of the framework are we using? What libraries are we linking to? What's our security? All of that stuff gets laid out. This is basically just an XML file. So we get this by default. What language are we using? What type of database? We also got all of this. Because we picked that web forms template, look at all the JavaScript it pulled in for us. Right? You don't have to go and find those things or copy them from another project or use a CDN. Microsoft pulled very nicely, gave us all the JavaScript, modern JavaScript libraries we're probably going to want. Obviously, we can add our own. So you get scripts. It gave us somewhere in here, probably under content. And you'll remember from those of you who are in Tom's class, right? Remember when you would create a JavaScript project, he had you create a content folder and a scripts folder. Here's why, because he knew Visual Studio was going to do this for you. So it automatically pulls in Bootstrap, gives us our own kind of basic CSS file we can start with and change as we like. Pulls in some fonts here as well. Devin?
Are all these dependencies managed automatically by Visual Studio, like if they update jQuery, Bootstrap, and stuff like that, automatically get pulled in with like updates and stuff to Visual Studio?
I believe so, but the Visual Studio updates, they don't update Visual Studio regularly. Like I think they're on update 3. The Visual Studio updates are major updates. Like there'll be 2 gigs to download. So it's not like these things are updated daily. If a new jQuery version comes out, I believe there's an extension. So there's a thing called a package manager, called the Nuget package manager. And I think there are tools that you can get to update those automatically, but I don't think it comes that way out of the box. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, good question. Yeah, so here's packages.config. So you could update it. Yeah, so it defines them here, but it won't update automatically. Like if you build this and then tonight there's a new version of jQuery, when we open this up tomorrow, you don't have the new version of jQuery. Right? And it will be the same when we use Node.js. You install a package, but you have to keep it up to date. It won't auto update. Very good question. Thanks for mentioning that. So we can actually run this application. Now, when we build PHP pages, right, if in order to run them on our own machine, you had to install a web server, right? You installed WAMP server or XAMPP, or maybe you installed MAMP if you were a Mac user. One of the other nice things about Visual Studio, it comes with its own localhost server. So all I need to do to start this, if I click the debug menu, there's 2 options. Most of the time, I'm going to click Start Without Debugging. If you click this button, it will start the local server, but that actually starts the debugger, which we'll want to use sometimes, but when the debugger's running, your code is locked and you can't change it. So that means you have to keep stopping and restarting the server every time you change your code. It's actually easier if you click Debug and Start Without Debugging, and it will launch this site in whatever the default browser is on your machine. So it's going to compile my code. If I get any errors, it's going to tell me, and look what it says it did. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to Visual Studio. It says it compiled this into the bin folder, and it created a DLL called Web Application 1. Right? If I go into my folder, here's a bin, and here's my Web Application 1 created at 10:18 today. All of these are all the support libraries that my application is using. That's why it's 63 megabytes. Right? If I don't want some of those things, I can get rid of them. So now what does it look like in my browser? Here we go. Well, that's not a bad place to start. So it runs at localhost, and every time you make a new project, Visual Studio just randomly assigns a port number. So if you have 10 websites, and you can actually run them all at the same time. You can open up Visual Studio 10 times and actually have 10 different sites going on your computer all at once. Each one will be localhost with a different port. And you can change that port. If you want to specify this is localhost 300, the next one's localhost 400, that's fine. You can change that in the settings. Okay. So it gives me a home page. Obviously, you can tell it uses Bootstrap for the CSS. Right? It's responsive with my little nav pull down. They give me a few sample pages I could customize and change. And they even give me this. Yep. So I have login and register, because remember when we created the project, it said individual accounts. I left that as the default security. So what happens if I try, it's got validation. But if I try to log in, we haven't set up a database, we haven't done anything. Right? I don't actually get an error. It says that account doesn't exist. It will actually let me sign up. It's creating a local database. We'll look at the database connection in a minute. Let's go back. Here's our web.config. It actually comes when you install Visual Studio. Let's look at our database connection. It's creating a local DB with this name. It's actually creating an SQL Server database on the fly. We didn't have to set this up. So if I actually register, well, has password validation built right in, which didn't match. Not making this easy for me. Okay, so now it knows who I am. It's logged me in. It's given me a profile page. I should now be able to log back in with that account. I can even have it write a cookie so I won't have to log in again. Never recommended, as we talked about last term. So now I've logged back in, so I actually can register. All this stuff comes, so you can see why this saves us time, right? Obviously, this is nowhere near a finished application, but that's a lot of work that we would have had to do on our own. So this is a starting point, right? I can get rid of these pages. I could change the links. I can update the CSS. I could change the login, but this is a great place to start if I want. Yes, I have 63 megs worth of stuff, but I've saved a lot of time doing this. So they've automated all this stuff. So this window, which we can close and hide, is called the Solution Explorer. And it's great because we can see all of our entire application here. And you can minimize this. I want to show you a couple of other features. Let's go to, so I'll go into the login page. We talked about, so that's under account. Let me go to login. So here's all the HTML. Most of it will look familiar. There's a few server-side tags here, but notice how much cleaner this is. than a PHP code application would be. There are a few things here that would be new. Where do you see something you haven't seen before? What's something on here we've never seen before? So we've got a whole bunch of these ASP tags, right? ASP label, ASP text box. Yet when I go to the login page in the browser, let's go back, and we view the source, right? There's our label. It's just regular HTML, right? There's no ASP tags. We're just getting regular standard HTML5. So what's happening? What do you suppose those little ASP tags, what do they mean or how do they work? Yep, they are built in.
They'll probably create some like class or ID to set up some styles and stuff.
Okay. This is part of what's happening, right? We write those tags that are particular to ASP in Visual Studio, but when our code is compiled and run in the browser, the .NET compiler converts ASP label to a standard HTML5 label tag. It converts an ASP text box to a standard input tag. Now, why wouldn't we just write the regular HTML tags? Well, we'll come back to that question. Okay. But mostly it looks like the HTML you've seen before. What about the server-side code? Remember we said there's two files. So where's the C# live that processes a login? So notice here I've got my login.aspx, but if I expand it, I get these two files. This file is auto-generated, this designer file, we don't touch those. That's just Visual Studio. But here's our code on login. There's no HTML here. This is all server-side code. All of this stuff goes in the DLL. Yeah, it looks like JavaScript, right? Learning the language of C# should be easy for you guys. You know JavaScript, you know PHP. It's all the same structure. The difference is this is fully object-oriented. We'll talk about objects next week, okay? A few of you already know about objects, but we'll need a bit of a lesson on what is an object, okay? And unlike your PHP code, where we just write all the code, one line, it executes from top to bottom, what do you notice about how this code is organized? Doesn't just run from the top all the way to the bottom of the page. How does it run instead? Yeah, it's based on events that happen in the page. It's organized. When do you suppose this code runs? Yeah, when the page load event happens. Every time that page is loaded in a browser, that code's going to run. When's this going to run? Yeah, when the user clicks the login button. So Artem, that also you said, well, what if the code's really long? Isn't it hard for us to follow? Yes and no, but because it's organized into event blocks, this code only happens on this event when the user clicks this button. Okay, so it has that organization built in.
So is that kind of what you meant when you could actually go line by line through the code earlier?
I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you two things. So first of all, the compiling. Let's say I do this. I forget my closing quote when I type that line. Now I want to run my page. I'll say start without debugging. That's what you get when you have a syntax error in your code. You can't load the page. Right? It didn't build, it didn't compile, so the DLL hasn't changed. If we look at our DLL, it's still from 10.18, right? My new compile didn't work. And it tells me, here you go. The error's in this file on this line, and here's the error message. When you forget a semicolon, that's what it will do.
So you don't need to go into the browser to find what from.
So probably 70% of your mistakes, Visual Studio catches. That saves us a huge amount of time. Okay, and it's even telling me when I mouse over what's wrong in some cases, sorry. Right, I put it back, the error automatically clears up, and now I can, to compile, I click on build solution. Right, now if I refresh here, my DLL is updated, it's built now. So that's the current version at 10.28. So as developers, you can see why this helps. It saves you a lot of time. I'll show well, let's look at the debugger as well. Okay. Let's say we want to look at the code. What happens when the user clicks the login button? Over here, you see I've got this gray bar. And actually, probably, are the line numbers on in your version, or do you not have the line numbers? They are on? Okay. It used to be you had to turn them on. They weren't on by default, which was very annoying. You had to go into the settings and enable line numbers. They finally figured this out after 15 years. So if I click in this gray bar beside line 26, puts a red dot there. This is a breakpoint. So I want to run this page in my browser, but once the user clicks the login button, I want the execution to transfer to Visual Studio so I can watch the code. So now I can either click this button or I can click Start Debugging. So start the application, but now my debugger is on. So it's going to recompile it, try to compile. So it's going to load it again. Now, it is slow to compile. You notice the first time you run it, it takes a few minutes. It takes a second to launch. So now I'm going to go to login.
We'll get that faster, just maybe on an SSD or faster networking.
It might, but it will still be slow the first time you compile. And the bigger your application is, the longer it takes to compile. Okay, so here's what happens. I click login. And now it jumps me to Visual Studio, and this bracket, it turns yellow. Now it's showing me, I can close this stuff. It's showing me how much of my processor is being used if I'm slow on the server. But at the moment, I'm just interested in my code. I'm going to close that. If I press the F11 key, okay, it's checking a variable called isValid. If I put my cursor over it, it tells me the value of that variable. It's true. So let's say I'm checking a database query. I can see what I got back. Do I have any values in my query? And now I can go through one line at a time. It's going to use the built-in security and sign-in manager. It will tell me there's the value of my email text box when I mouse over it. Here's the value of my password box. Did I check? And are we locking the user out? And in a minute, it's going to tell me whether my result was successful or not. An invalid password, notice after it called this function, password sign in, result is false. I put in an invalid password. And now it evaluates, and I can see what happened. Status was failure, so show that message. And stop. Okay, and print out the message. So I can stop the debugger now. So we can actually see what's happening on the server. And we've been able to do this for a long time. So it makes figuring out when things don't work right, makes figuring out why they went wrong way easier for us. So we'll use the debugger whenever things go wrong. That's the first thing to try. Where is my code not working? Can I put in a breakpoint and walk through it and try and watch one line at a time what's happening? So if you're actually building, I'm not going to use this template because these applications are really big and a lot of what's here we're really not going to use. And we want to kind of build this stuff ourselves. But if you're actually going to build something with ASP.NET, this is a great place to start. Start with the 63 megabyte template and use all these things and change them as you want to. The other thing I want to point out is this file. So this web.configs our global configuration. We also get this file called global.asax. It's a code-only file. There's no interface. This is where we can write global code for the application. So for example, we might want to write a global error handler here. If there's an error in our application, send me an email and redirect to our error page. We'll do that later on. Or any other things like registering roles and permissions for authentication, we can manage them, and all the pages in our site have access to this code. So any kind of global scope code can run within global ASAX, and that's built right in. We may use it, we may not use it, but it's here if we want it. Okay, I'm going to close that solution. And what we're going to do now is we're going to make a blank solution, and we'll just play around a little bit, throw a few things on there. Okay. So this time I'm going to click File, New Project. We're not going to do a lot with it, but you know what? I'm going to create. I would suggest creating on your computer a COMP2084 folder for all the stuff you do in this class. So inside my COMP2084, I'm just going to call this, well, I'll call it week 2. I'm going to create a solution called week 2. And you know what? I'm going to check create new Git repository. Why not? We'll upload it to GitHub as well. Instead of web forms, this time I'm just going to pick empty. And then down here, I'll check off that this is a web forms application. So choose empty and pick web forms. We won't worry about Azure for now. Click OK. So we're going to get a much smaller version. We don't get Bootstrap, we don't get jQuery, we don't get a login register page. This is all we get. So this is the base model. So all we get is the web.config file. The packages is basically empty, and our global code file. So we want to add a web page to this solution, and we can play around a little bit with some of those server controls for a minute. So to add a web page, if I right click here on my week 2, not the solution, but in the project, and choose add a new item, we can add any of these things, HTML, JavaScript, CSS. I want a web form, and it will give it an ASPX extension. So let's just call this default.aspx. It's just going to be a blank page. And I'll add that. So it gives me an HTML5 template to work from. It does have this code at the top. What language is our server-side code going to be in? It's going to be in C#. What is the name of the C# file that contains the server-side code? And what's the name of the object or class? We'll talk more about this next week. So we can just throw on regular HTML, an H1 tag. If we want, we can actually click on down here. Notice there's a tab that says, this tab says source. We can click design for what you see is what you get editor, or you can click split where you see both the HTML and the visual editor at the same time. So this is what Visual Studio Code, part of what it doesn't do. It's code only. So I'll just save that page. And then to view it in the browser, we need to launch our local web server. So if we click debug and start without debugging, going to quickly compile. Notice how much faster that was. It's much smaller. And here's our default page with our standard HTML5. We'll talk about this more next week. We may have time to look at it today. There's a hidden input here called view state with a whole bunch of what looks like encrypted content. Anybody have any idea what the heck that's for? We didn't put it there. It's not in our HTML.
Is it for mobile phones and tablets and computers?
It's a very good guess, but no. Devin?
An auto-generated key validated against injection.
That would be awesome if it was that. That's a great idea. It's not that. One of the other neat things that ASP.NET came up with, this is not a great solution, but the output for us as developers is really good. We'll throw a couple lines of code on here and you'll see why. Okay. Let's put on a regular HTML input box. Okay, just a text box. Input ID equals HTML text. Put on one of those. And now we're also going to put on the ASP version, the server version of a text box. Okay. It will look like a regular HTML text box, but it has much more functionality. So underneath, and there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either type, or if you click the view menu, and down near the bottom, there's an option that says Toolbox. Artem, you only got to stay awake for 10 more minutes. In the toolbox, these are all the server-side versions of the regular HTML controls. But it also has other things like image buttons and grids and panels and things like that. Let's click on a text box and drag it on here. And you notice, or you can just type the code, doesn't matter. So notice we get an ID. We'll call this ASP text box. It also has this run@equals-server attribute. Whenever we use the server-side controls, we need that run@equals-server. What that means, it does two things. It means send regular HTML to the browser, but allow us to access this control on the server with C# code. So we're going to add both text boxes, and then we want to add a button. Let's try just a regular HTML button. We have an HTML text box, an HTML button, as well as an ASP text box. HTML only, we haven't written any C#. Let's save that. And now we'll go back to the browser and refresh our page. So let's go back here. So I've got two text boxes. View the source. They largely look the same. Let me do that again. Right, they're both rendered as regular HTML. Why is that value staying and the original and the value in the HTML input going away? What do you suppose this box does? Yeah, the view state, it's not an elegant solution, but the view state remembers all of the values on the page. So when the page reloads, those values aren't gone. You may have remembered in the very first PHP class, and there was an exam question, we talked about the web being stateless. What does that mean? HTTP is stateless, right? Why does that value go away when I reload the page? Yeah, because the browser has no way to remember. Every time we get a new request, all of the previous values and variables are lost, which is a huge pain for web developers, right? Because browsers are stupid and they haven't gotten much smarter over the years. So this view state that Microsoft created, yes, it makes our pages bigger and not as fast, but it allows the pages to remember the previous state of the page. So things don't have to be reloaded. It's like putting it in session, but it's automatic. Now, if you don't want it, you can disable it on any page that doesn't need it. But I think all you have to do is if we go into the, and yes, I realize our time's almost up. The properties window of the page may be in here. In one of these tags, we can disable it. Yeah, so right in the header, enable view state, you just turn that equal to false. And then that's not there if you don't need it. Okay. But this run at equals server is key as well. So the end user's getting what looks like regular HTML, but it's much smarter than regular HTML. It can remember, and we can access it on the server in C# code if we want to save that value or change that value or lock or unlock the text box maybe. Change the color, change the class of any item. When we use run at equals server and we use those ASP controls, they're smart. They're smarter versions of our dumb HTML controls that really don't do very much. So we won't use, for forms, we won't use these very much. Why would we use those when we can use these versions instead? So what we're going to do next week's class is we need to talk about objects, what an object is, methods, properties, and how these things work, because we're working with an object-oriented language and framework, okay? The computer programmer students, so people like Matt, Thomas, you may have taken it, they take an entire course in object-oriented programming, which you guys don't get. So next week is kind of a crash course, but you need to be here on time because it's going to help you understand the whole ASP.NET and C# model, because it's all based around objects, right? If I want, in my server-side code, the last thing I'm going to show you, so on page load, we can now say ASP text box dot, and now we can do things with it. We can set the color when the page loads. We can make it locked so users can't type in that box. We could hide it, we could show it. We can access that control in our C# code. We could read the value to know what the user typed and save that to a database, for example. So this is what our code, this is where we're going and what it's going to look like. So next week, yeah, we'll talk about objects, and then in 2 weeks, we'll play around with all of these different controls. Drop-down lists and grids, text boxes, buttons. We'll also look at how the master pages work, so we can create our own template and apply, we could add Bootstrap to that template, add a header footer, and link it to all of our pages, so we have a theme. That's what we'll do the next couple weeks.
You used just common HTML break button, but is ASP analog of HTML button?
Sorry, is it?
Analog, I mean the same like ASP something button.
Yes, it will, in the browser, if I do ASP button, it will show as a regular HTML button tag. But we can access it on the server, and we have all of the server features as well. But in the browser, it will be a regular HTML button.
Could you show code again? For example, for text box, you use ASP text box.
Yes, there's an ASP button.
Yeah.
So ID equals.
What the difference?
Okay, good question. That's the last question for today, and then we'll get out of here. Right. So if I put a button on, I guess I should say text equals submit. Artem's asked one very good question. Right. We can see the text boxes are different. So they're going to look the same between these two buttons. This is my HTML button. This is my ASP button. They both look like regular buttons, right? They both say, although it uses old syntax, I guess didn't render it as a button tag. But when we build forms, we're probably going to want to use ASP buttons instead of HTML buttons. What would be the difference? True, we can use Bootstrap with both.
Yeah, I just figured that these people would have to be that on it.
Well, what will we typically want to do with our application when the user clicks a button? Yeah, we're going to run some kind of C# code. The HTML buttons won't trigger C# code. How do we trigger C# code on our ASP.NET button? Real easy. I take my button, go into the designer, and double click it. And Visual Studio writes an event handler. This is what happens when that button is clicked. Maybe I say btn submit enabled. Right? Maybe this is a checkout button. We only want the user to click it once. We don't want them to be able to click it again. So as soon as they click it, so I've changed my C#. I'll recompile my code now. And now when I click it, it should be locked. It'll take a minute to recompile. So that's how we're going to write all our C# code. We'll use the page load and the events from the ASP.NET controls to run our C# code.
And we can do it with that.
We have no way to write server-side code on the HTML button. We use the ASP buttons instead. Okay. So they've made life actually, it's a different way of doing it, but it actually makes it a lot easier. It's very organized, and it actually makes building our applications a much easier. Just takes a little while to understand all the pieces and how they fit together. Okay, you're free. I'll set you free. Enjoy your class this afternoon.